Hello,
Hi,
Hello.
Hey
Hey,
everyone.
welcome. Uh,
thanks, Preet.
Thary, I don't know why I said joining from Canada, but Vancouver. It's
But Vancouver, I'm
yeah,
a little
yeah,
offended.
yeah.
Mm.
As I was saying those words, I was realizing it. So,
That's fine.
but
That's fine. There's no hard feelings.
true. We're really excited to have all of you folks joining us today. I know I did not do much of an introduction. I just read out your names and roles, current roles, but it would be amazing to go around, do a short round of introductions, maybe also give a little sneak peek into your journey as a designer, because that's what we're talking all about today, design career paths.
Mhm. Sounds good.
Anyone can go first.
I guess I can go first. Hi, I'm Thary. I'm a product design manager at Cognizant Softvision, and I have been there for about 3 years. And I started there as a senior. I kind of I moved into lead, and now I'm a manager. So that trajectory has been pretty fast in terms of like IC to manager. So I'm still kind of learning on the role right now. But in terms of my career path to here, I pretty much started in a long, long time ago, back when it was like Photoshop 7. And
Mhm.
I went to college for graphic design. Pretty much a lot of similar stories to a lot of people in product right now is like starting graphic design, sort of naturally moved into the digital space, and then sort of never looked back. In terms of history, like I've worked in enterprise, I've worked in startups, I've worked in agency, you name it, I've been there. So I've been around the block, and I've experienced a lot of different environments and design challenges. And now I'm just kind of rolling into my next challenge, which is managing people.
That's amazing. That's incredible. We'll definitely get into some of those details also soon as we get into our discussion. So, thank you so much for sharing that. Let's go to Ananya.
Hi, everyone. As Preet mentioned, I'm joining from India, and currently I'm a designer at Microsoft. Before this, I was actually the AVP of product design at Zomato. And for folks who are familiar, Zomato is one of the two biggest food delivery players in India right now. They recently had an IPO. So for me personally, I've sort of transitioned back into an IC role from a manager role. And before Zomato, I had stints at other startups like Udacity, another organization called Make My Trip, which is also a large player in the online travel booking space. And I've been working for about 6.5 years now, and my background is again quite similar to Terry's, where I did my undergrad and master's in graphic design, and then sort of realized that in order to have an impact, a larger impact, the digital space sort of made more sense, and then just sort of moved in that area and have been doing that ever since. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Amazing. Welcome. And again, thank you for accommodating the time zone. So, thank you for that.
No worries.
Molly.
yes, thanks, Preet. Hey, everyone. So great to be back at Remote Design Week. I also, just before we get started, this is so cool how global this panel is. I mean, this is like truly embracing the benefit of remote. So that's really awesome. We're all over the world right now. But I'm Molly. I'm currently product design manager at Webflow. It'll actually be my 2-year anniversary next week. But in terms of my journey to here, I had a bit of a both like direct and slightly unusual path, and we can get more into some of my thoughts on that. But I studied film in my undergrad and ended up towards the end of that discovering this term interaction design. Product design wasn't yet a thing, and it kind of everything clicked for me. Like, oh, I was taking all of these like film and theater design and psychology and all these weird subjects that felt really disparate, and then they came together in this discipline. And so I made the decision to actually go to grad school for design right out of undergrad. Don't necessarily recommend it, especially just within today's landscape of the support and boot camps, but we can maybe chat more about that. But went straight into that grad program, and then from there I started my career at an agency. So I was on the agency and studio side for a number of years. And then I eventually made the decision to focus a little bit more on people. And I also wanted to move in-house. And so that led me to Webflow a couple of years ago.
Wow, that sounds really like an incredible journey, and thank you for also bringing up that point around the design education part. So just to remind folks, we will kick off with talking a little bit about getting into design. So go into chat and tell us like how you got into design from an education perspective. Did you go to design school or not? Until then, a panelist on another continent. So we'll go to Sam.
Hey everyone, I'm super excited to be here and talk about this topic. Yeah, so I had a little more of an unusual route into design. I studied urban planning at university. I'm bizarrely from a family of urban planners, at least 5 family members, plus my partner work in the built environment. So I actually got into design through teaching myself design by starting a magazine. And then originally I wanted to be a writer. So I went down kind of that path, got a couple of jobs on the production side, and then slowly morphed into the design side. And then moved in-house at the start of my career. I worked mostly agency side, both kind of big and small, and learned a lot there. And then more recently, I've been in in-house roles. I worked at a fintech startup before Zendesk for a couple of years, and now I've been at Zendesk for about 2.5 years, where originally I worked on physical brand experience and events before the pandemic, and post-pandemic, more digital things. So I'm now mostly working on our campaigns.
That is really really incredible, Sam. And as I was sharing with all of you before we kicked off that I had everyone's LinkedIn profiles open, so I could sneak peek into some of your past roles and dive into some of those questions there. So first of all, congratulations, Sam. Seems like you just a transition from being an art director to an associate creative director. That happened this month. Thank
Few days ago. Yeah, a few days ago. So
Amazing.
fresh, it didn't quite make it to the title slide.
That's true. But congratulations on that. So, um, you were talking a little bit about how you come from a family of urban, like having 5 urban planners. So that's amazing. So, when you went to school for design and that transition happened in moving from urban planning into design, like how much of what were the factors informing your decision whether to go to school for urban planning and then also choosing to self teach yourself design and venture on that journey?
Really, I think just discovering my passion for it. I kind of fell into urban design as well because I wanted to be an architect, but I didn't study art at school. I didn't realize you needed a book to get into architecture at university. So I kind of dropped down to urban planning. Don't tell my family members I said that. And then the first summer of I thought I wanted to be an urban planner, and then the first summer of university did an internship as an urban planner. Didn't really like it, and then I'd started this magazine, so then I kind of had this like refocus. That was what I really loved to do. It was more the writing side, and then design kind of started to pick up. But for me, yeah, it was mostly around kind of just thinking, what do I love doing? What was the stuff I was doing out of hours that I was happy to like throw my evenings into, and then how could I go about making that my day job, really?
Wow, that sounds really really incredible, and many sub themes in there that I personally can definitely relate with. So I I I want to ask Ananya because I'm a little jealous that Ananya got to go to really one of the incredible design schools in India, the National Institute of Design. So when my family was bribing me with different things to get into engineering school, that was the design school I always wanted to go into. But again, ended up going into civil engineering, so closer to the urban planning folks. Um, Ananya, what factors were there that informed your decision? And I know again I'm just speaking based on my context, coming from the family that I grew up in and the environment. So the the school you get into defines almost the career choice.
Hmm.
So it's like, oh, if you get into a really good school in civil engineering, then yes, you're a civil engineer. And I could have gotten maybe into design if I had gotten into that design school. So what was the decision for you like?
I think I was sort of lucky, at least from the family angle side of things. I don't think my parents ever pushed me towards a specific sort of a career. Although I think at the time that I was going to design school, it was still relatively new. I think to this day, the only thing where I can explain it to people is that I design apps, and then they sort of get the gist of what you're really doing. And the course that I actually did in my undergrad was called communication design, and good luck explaining that to anybody at all. A cousin of mine once asked me, "So, do you make clothes talk to each other?" And I was like, "No, that is absolutely not what it is." And it was a funny thing because the school was actually more fashion oriented. So, my undergrad was National Institute of Fashion Technology. And I think that that is also how my interest in design started. When I was younger, my mother had done a course in this. She used to have a boutique of hers that she shut down after a couple of years. So I kind of had a little bit of exposure towards that side of things. And I wanted to study fashion without any understanding of what fashion actually is, or without any understanding of what design actually is. So for me, it was very like, I want to go to this particular school, and I was just fortunate enough to clear the entrance exams and find my way there. And NIFT has a really funny admission process where you have to declare your specialization before you even start. So you basically don't have any exposure to what it will be. And just on a whim, I decided to opt for communication design instead of fashion design because it just sounded a little bit more interesting. It had a lot of different things in it. There was graphic design, there was fashion styling, there was visual merchandising, photography. So that just sounded interesting. So I was like, this sounds like fun. Let's do this. And then I still remember in the early days, I was a lot more interested in visual merchandising. Then that moved to illustration, that moved to graphic design. And then in my master's, I was still a little confused about whether I want to do that in graphic design versus interaction design. And I think ultimately I decided that I wanted to have like the classic NID experience at the Ahmedabad campus, which is kind of how design started in India. That's how you can trace the history of design in India, and that is what decided it for me. So I went there. I got to sort of study from amazing faculty. We had a print lab on the campus. We actually got to do letterpress printing by hand. So I feel like that is an experience I wouldn't have gotten to have anywhere else. And I think that sort of ended up informing my decision. So I've realized over a period of time, though, now it doesn't really matter what design discipline you've chosen. It actually doesn't even matter what your undergrad or bachelor degree is. Anybody can, become a designer or have a really, really successful career in design. I know a lot of colleagues who've never went to formal design school, and they're amazing designers. I wish I could create the kind of stuff that they do. But I think for me it was a little bit more exploratory and just sort of seeing, what sounds interesting, and just being lucky enough to actually just get into those things to experience them, and not then having to decide that, okay, I didn't get the thing that I actually wanted, so what else is out there that I can actually do. So yeah.
Very cool, very cool. I still remember still trying to drop out of engineering school in the second year to maybe apply to NID. So definitely can relate to the excitement part. And yeah, for those of you who are not aware, like it's almost like how you think of Silicon Valley when you think of tech in US. So that's the same with us, and I was pointing with design in India. Um, so you had you towards the end you said a really interesting thing that like these days anymore it doesn't matter what you did in your undergrad school or university. So for Molly and Thary, who went to some incredible schools for design, um, what are your opinions on this shift in design education? Because we have quite a few folks asking questions around doing a boot camp program and how they're perceived in the job market. Would love to hear your opinions.
For sure. Molly, I didn't go first. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the like furious head nodding that you saw, especially when Ananya was talking about how like you don't like some of the most amazing designers don't have any formal education. I think that that's really key for me personally. I mean, we're now talking. I made the decision to go to grad school almost 12 years ago. It was a long time ago. And you know, that for me was a honestly kind of like a cost benefit analysis. So I mentioned I was studied film, and then I took a web design elective because, like a lot of designers in their 30s, I coded live journal themes way back in the day. Anybody remembers that?
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, okay, easy A, and you know, had a really fantastic professor. And I just discovered, as I mentioned before, this term, you know, interaction design and UX design. Those are sort of like the main ways that we were talking about design then. And just really threw all my weight into that. Started working for the university as a web designer and front end developer. But I knew I wanted to do this as sort of what I viewed as just like the more like meaty design type of problems. And I knew that I could go get a job as a web designer, but I saw these other jobs and I sort of didn't know how to get there. And so for me, the decision to go to grad school right away was I just wanted to kind of accelerate that and get just some of that education. Also, frankly, a big part of design education is the network. I think that's something we have to acknowledge is there's a lot that you are buying into with an education as the people and the connections that you're making. And so that was my decision that sort of accelerated things for me, and for me worked out well. But that was a very specific point in time. And I think now there's so much, whether it's boot camps, but also just online, just the resources. I mean, just that there are, you know, so many amazing people on YouTube who are sharing their journeys through UX to product design. You can learn so many skills online. And really, at least for me as a hiring manager, you know, of course, I look at, you know, experience and education, but the portfolio is what's going to really carry you through. And there's now a lot of different avenues for you to really build up that portfolio for yourself. But yeah, Thary, I'm curious your perspective.
Yeah, that definitely kind of rings a bell with me. I find it's interesting what you said about just the boot camps and the design, you know, the universities themselves, and being on the side of hiring a lot of people. To be honest, I don't even look at boot camp or I don't even look at education so much. Like usually I'll look at their portfolio first and then I'll take a look at like where they've been. It usually speaks for themselves. So from my side, I just find that really you're looking at your like the soft skills that you grow, your skills in visual design, wherever you get it. Those are the key things that really kind of, I think, drive a good candidate or a good designer. And in terms of my own experience, like I feel like I've been very lucky in my career. When I was graduating high school at like 16, I was very much like, I have no idea kind of what I'm doing. But at the same time, I was like, all right, I need to go to college. And caveat that like in Montreal, where I grew up, you have to take a college degree before you go to university. It's sort of like a mid situation. So I kind of fluked it and just kind of was like, I guess I'll go into graphic design. What is this thing? So no other options, just went straight into applying that one. Was like, all right, if I get into it, I'll get into it. If I don't, that's cool. But that 3-year program was very foundational to like to my design skills. And I do think that there is value in design education because you get access to a lot of experienced instructors, professors, community, like you said, and that college experience. It was a 3-year technical program that would allow you to work right away. So by like 19, I was already working. But the gap that I found in terms of like technical skills and then going into you like and then like growing in your career was really like being able to talk about design. And that's where I was adamant sort of about going into university with it because my experience at OCAD gave me the ability to speak about design from a very kind of knowledgeable space, like understanding the theories and the backgrounds and that context that sometimes you don't get from 6-week boot camps or 9 weeks boot camps, and being able to build a community of other really amazing artists and like designers, interior, photography, illustration. So my experience at OCAD was, to me, felt like a cherry on top of being like, so I know how to do the work. Now I can talk about the work that I'm doing in a way that is a little bit more than I could before. And that's kind of helped me in my career in terms of being a little like trying things and applying for things and getting there.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a good point. And one thing, what that made me also think of is, and this is not a reason to pursue a design education, but also one thing that you do get from that is also writing skills.
Yeah.
And writing, I think, is something like early in your career that you don't realize is like, this is so, AirPod issue. This is so really key and foundational to actually being a designer. Yes, we deal a lot with visual, but written's really important. And as we move into more and more remote environments, writing's only becoming more. And that was definitely something that I was able to develop in really any, of course, graduate undergrad program, but also in a design program.
Yeah, and I just caveat that like I didn't do a 4-year university program. I sort of skipped 2 years and just went straight to like third year, just because if I had to do 4 years, I would have killed myself. But yeah, but it was so it helped me make that decision of being like, okay, well, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna and it worked out.
That's I think there were a lot of interesting kind of things you said, Thary, that we I'd love to kind of dissect into with all the other panelists. I think the part about all the other these kind of like soft skills is the most commonly used label that you hear that you get to pick up when you go to a proper program for 2, 3, 4 years. Um, I think it's not even as much like you generally see a lot of bootcamp students struggling, out there once they graduate from the 6 week program. And sometimes it's not so much about just based on my experience, so much about how much they know about design from the tooling, the processes, the workflows, and all those things. But it's just that you've not been able to put in the work that you would put in a 3 year program. So just the whole practice component is missing, just based on the time frame. The expectations get set wrong a little bit that after 6 weeks you're gonna get a job. So it's again it's almost like you went to a boot camp for your fitness, and yes, now you know all the exercises, but you still need to put in the work and go to the gym every day to get fit. So I think that's where sometimes there can be a little bit of a mismatch. And Iram had a really good question around this, which was, so when folks do go to the bootcamp school, of course it's much more affordable, much more accessible as an education channel. Right after that, how can now you go out and get some real world experience? Because that's what you see a lot of bootcamp students struggle with. How do they build their portfolio? How do they get that experience on how to talk about their projects when the whole infrastructure around them is not there?
I think it's hard. I think through my career and what I've kind of suggested to, in other talks and in mentoring people is just trying to do stuff. It's with kind of the whole bootcamp thing and the fact that you can just pick up software now for a pretty cheap price a month. Like you've got the basics, you've got Figma, Sketch, Adobe Suite, like the core practices of design, how the tools work, what grids are. I had to teach myself grids like back in the day, and like all that technical stuff is actually quite hard to pick up. So if you get a head start on that, that's amazing. But like you both mentioned, like the soft skills of how you talk around design, how you work through feedback, you just really learn through practice as well. So do some side projects, start building out your portfolio with the types of work, fake websites that you'd be wanting to do in the future, and then kind of take it from there.
Yeah,
And
just to add to what
God.
Sam was saying, like essentially when you're in design school, all the projects that you do are usually hypothetical anyhow. They are not necessarily things that exist in the world. You pick up a problem statement, you go do some field studies, interviews on it, and then you propose solutions for it. You can do the same thing without a design school also, right? You can look at the world around you, identify a problem statement of apps and products that you use every day, and then think about how could I do something differently over here. You can find people within your network who are also users of that product, test it with them, get some feedback, and then present a solution. And when you put in that work and you show that in your interview or your portfolio, a hiring manager will take notice. They will appreciate the fact that you're a person who has done that kind of legwork, and will sometimes you'll stand out for just that reason. Even more so than candidates from design schools. You actually had all the support and scaffolding of everything sort of being presented to them, everything being scheduled for them. You don't have any of that, and you still did it yourself anyway. I still remember that when we were hiring, we used to give out design assignments earlier, and one of the candidates had actually gone to the airport to interview candidates. And that became the thing that stood out in his entire journey. And even though the senior leadership of the organization was a little reluctant to hire him, we pushed for it. We said that this one characteristic, this one trait will really help us, and let's just get him in. Even though he's a fresher, we can get him in, we can see how things work out. And then he did get a job with us, and now he has a really successful career going on. He runs design communities himself. So I feel like there's nothing really stopping you from doing that. You don't need permission, or you don't need to be in a design school, or you don't need this prepared brief by somebody to go ahead and do that.
Mhm. One of the things I kind of press for a lot of my like junior intermediate or junior intern designers, so folks that are kind of coming out of school, is it's okay that your work is mostly technical. I would say, like, if you are, before you even graduate, reach out to companies. They always need good people to kind of support. Like, product design is in demand. And I know that in my experience now is the interns we've had in the past have been amazing, and we constantly hire them. But my expectation for them is that they're strong visually. That's all that I expect. Like, in terms of soft skills or communication or presentation, like those are all more intermediate senior expectations. So if you have a good portfolio, if you are a keen attitude, you can just reach out and people will like pick up for that. And I don't think you should worry so much about the skills you lack, because no one's expecting you to be amazing immediately as soon as you jump out. And especially if you're coming from boot camps, to me, I think it's like you said, like that change of perspective. It's you're figuring out how to do a job. There are whole other aspects of it. Design is its own thing, but you're figuring out how to do something. So I think you have to kind of give yourself a little bit of slack and allow yourself to kind of be like, I don't know these things, but I'm willing to learn these things. And that's really the attitude that I think most people are looking for.
Yeah. I think it's also worth noting that this is not all on the designers who are trying to get into the industry. That it's really responsibility as hiring managers to, Ananya, to your point, to really recognize that there's a lot that people are up against. It's a huge privilege to have access to education, to have access to boot camps. There's other ways for people to demonstrate. And also, like, as an industry, we need to get better about creating those internships and those other programs, other ways to sort of scaffold and get people in, whether that's apprenticeships. And so it's something that shouldn't just be sort of the burden on the young designers, but something that we should be. And I know that a lot of organizations and a lot of hiring managers are really trying to be that person and nurture that. And it was something that was big for me. I went through like a school type program through the agency Huge, and that was just fantastic. It was that sort of boot camp experience within an organization. And I would love to see more and more companies taking that and really investing in folks, because it is tough out there, but it is not just on the individual young designers.
That's a really, really good point, Molly. And definitely, I think as we're starting to see more and more companies have more mature design teams and practices, that it starts to trickle down as well. And we see more early stage opportunities too. And I think I think when Thary was talking about the duration you have, in your school time, the time you have to think and figure out things. I think it's definitely when you're on your own, when you go through a short intensive program, then you're out in the world, like just to be comfortable with the ambiguity that you're still trying to figure out. It takes time, and it definitely can be very challenging. But I think, like, even if I look back at my career, I think just sometimes if you're not able to figure out things, again, I think Sam was saying that, like, just do things. Like, and again, every person's different. Some folks like to sit down, think through, prepare, and then be very focused. For me, definitely, when I moved to Canada about 10, 12 years ago, didn't know anyone, didn't understand the work culture, and I was going on Craigslist and literally writing immigrant designer, working, willing to work for a minimum pay. And literally the jobs I got, because my choices were, I could work at Tim Hortons, which is the cafe chain here, for $10 an hour. And I was like, I'd rather design for $10 an hour. And the jobs I got were doing like plumbing websites, like mostly trades people, doing like very basic jobs. But it taught so much about just the work environment here, how you talk to people, because India, completely different work setting. And so yeah, it's again like no kind of perfect approach. Yeah, sorry, Sam.
No, I was just going to say as well, on what you were talking about before, the answers that you don't know, the answers that you don't know in the start of your career, you'll start picking up the answers to those, and then you get different questions which you don't know the answers to. There's never a moment where you have all the solutions. On a daily basis, there'll be things that you're still puzzling over, trying to figure out new creative ways to solve, and that's kind of the joy of design, I think, as well, because the world is different from yesterday to today. The solutions you need to create are always changing, so needing to be agile and dealing with uncertainty is maybe as big a skill you need as kind of raw design skills.
Very true. Very true.
Well said.
Oh, sorry.
I was just agreeing.
Yeah. Yeah, so very, very true. And again, design education is such a nebulous topic that we can definitely go on and on under the different paths around it. So talking now more about the like, you've done your education, you've got your foot in the door through whichever tactic and means, and you start to kind of grow yourself as a designer, as an individual contributor. So when you all of you look back at that stage, uh, what would you say were the key defining moments that then kind of helped shape your career? And to just give some guardrails, it's like, generally the questions you hear when folks are in their first, second, or maybe even third job as an IC, it's usually like, oh, should I be working in a studio environment because I'll get exposed to more things, but I get paid less, and work-life balance is out of, not in place? Or should I go work for a shiny startup where I get equity, but again, the pay might not be high, and work-life balance is maybe a little skewed? Or should I go for a little more safer job, grow slowly, and just grow all the way in the company? So there are like different, what were some of the factors that helped you decide some of those key moments? Was it the leader, was it the team, was it the pay?
I can jump in. I think for me, it was always just making the best of the opportunity that you do have. When I got my first role at a bigger agency, I was a designer on Colgate, and never in my career had I dreamed of making websites for toothbrushes. I've designed maybe 5 websites for toothpaste, which is very strange. But it teaches you like all these weird skills. That was my first exposure to a really big client. Before then, it had mostly been kind of indies or small little ads and that kind of thing. And like the stuff you pick up in terms of on that, what is a design system? How do I design something that looks and feels like Colgate, where the day before I was doing a poster for a club night or something like that. I think you'll find yourself in strange positions, maybe some great roles, some you don't love so much, but just try and learn and pick up as much as you can from each situation.
Mm-hmm. And for myself, I right out of college, I ended up in an in-house studio. It was just print, and it was a very mature studio. And I think my experience there was very foundational to the rest of my career, because all of the learnings in that 2 or 3 years that I was there was still follows me. Like they were very, if there's one thing I would recommend for people who are leaving school, is to try to join a team that has more than one designer. I don't care whether it's enterprise or startup or whatever, you need to work with someone else, because when you're working on an island, that's when you build bad behaviors. You just kind of like figure out your way, which is fine. You can figure out your way. But in terms of like how to work better, learn, even if they're only a year or two ahead of you, you're learning from somebody. So my time in that studio was, I was surrounded by so many people who were like already really good, and I was also given sort of a space to like fail if I had to, because I was like right out of college, and they gave me room to do that. And I think that's really helpful in terms of when you first start your career, is to be around other people. And then as you grow, for myself, I think it's knowing when to exit. It's like knowing when you have reached a point where you're not learning anymore. And that is why I've done in-house and I've done enterprise at the agency, is because I know when I need to leave and when it's no longer something I want anymore. And I always say, like, just have an exit plan. But I know it's not a great thing to say, but it's been helpful for me, because it's always kind of kept me on my path of like, what do I want out of my career? And is this giving me the thing that I want? And if not, find somewhere that is. So yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, that resonates a lot with me. I think like we talk about paths like it's a linear thing, but you're going to come across these forks, and sometimes the forks might feel like more of like a hard turn, but that can be really beneficial. And I think where I've tried to think about those decided or decisive moments for me is really just in terms of like what I'm learning and what do I want to learn next. So especially with, I was at a larger agency, and just didn't feel like I was necessarily getting the right skill set, and just made a decision to make sort of like, okay, I'm actually going to take what would be considered maybe for other people from the outside sort of a step back. And of course, I was young enough, and so I didn't have to worry so much about salary at that point in time. So I was able to make that decision for myself, but then that sort of propelled me further. But I think one thing, especially as you become more and more mature in your career, is something that I also come back to a lot, is like, where are you getting your energy from in the day? And that can also kind of help guide you in terms of like, I might need a change, and maybe it is a different type of work, or maybe it's a different type of environment. So are you getting most of your energy from that really focused time? Whereas for me, I was finding I was getting a lot of that in my one-on-ones, in a player coach role, and some more of the process and people side. And so that was like, ooh, this feels like a signal that maybe I need to take that fork and go more into management.
That was a really good point around really understanding, getting almost like inner clarity on where you're getting that energy from. I think Molly said really well that it's, again, career path is not linear, and so many of these the dark spots get cleared not by answers outside, but it's like really understanding where your uh, energy is getting defined from or coming from. Ananya, what about yourself? When you put yourself back, in those days at Make My Trip, or you were at Audacity, uh, what what was your headspace like?
Yeah, I think that I'm just generally a restless person. I've had a couple of jobs in the 6 years that I've been working. And, in the beginning, I was like constantly thinking that, okay, this isn't what I thought it would be, working as a designer would be so much more glamorous, but this is just really boring work. And developers asking you for specs and all of these things. I don't know if this is something that I really wanted to do. So I think it takes a few years for you to really understand, what your day-to-day work is and how the tiny little things that you're doing contribute to the overall business. When you're just starting out, it can be really frustrating to be designing icons and then, feel like, I wanted to create entire products or apps, and what am I sitting here doing, creating just icons? But I think when you've been there, when you've been doing that for a while, you realize that those little pieces make a huge impact. Not having that one icon will block the release and will, change the shipping date and will cost the business like millions of dollars if it doesn't get shipped on time. And it's in your hands to get that icon out in time. So I think that kind of thing takes a little bit of time to understand. And I definitely took me a lot of time. I think my manager was just really patient with me in the early years because I remember complaining a lot about, doing really boring work. And I think when things really changed for me was when I became a manager myself. I don't think I was really looking to become a manager. I think in startups, it's more like we have a need here. You seem like you can do this. Why don't you do this sort of a situation? And then you just have responsibilities coming at you and you start doing one thing after the other, and suddenly you find yourself being like a manager of the team. And it's slightly strange because the people that you work with were your peers till yesterday, and today you're their manager, so those one-on-ones can be really awkward. But I think that's when I really realized that as early designers, young designers, if you don't have that sense of what the tiny things that I'm doing, how do they ladder up, how do they contribute to the overall thing, that is where it becomes really challenging, where you can get really frustrated with your job. And as a leader, I feel like bringing your team into that wider picture, having some team rituals where they get to share their work, feel more included, see what the bigger picture of the whole thing is, that really helps sort of people see where things are going, right? So I think that that was sort of what my journey was like. And I don't really think there's one right answer there, right? Like sometimes people get really bogged down by this idea of like, I want like this dream job, or you don't want to have this particular thing. There can be so many other factors at play, right? For example, for me, I am based out of Delhi NCR and I have my family here and I don't want to relocate, which automatically reduces the amount of options available to me. And that's totally okay, right? I could constantly think about, I could go choose to work somewhere else if I wanted to. Why am I here? Or I can choose to think that, I am in a very privileged situation. I have had really great opportunities, and I'm just going to choose to bloom wherever I'm planted. So I think when you go in with that mindset, like Sam said, that you just make the best of the opportunity available to you. You don't worry about whether you're working in an agency or the fanciest corporate, or you're working on something that's, an internal tool versus the shiny consumer facing app. You just get really deep into whatever you're doing. You will sort of find happiness and fulfillment with that. And for me personally, it took a few years to get to that place. But I think that relying on your mentors, your seniors, talking to them about how you're feeling, sharing that, something is frustrating you, and for them also to recognize the fact that they need to keep creating this context for the younger designers on the team. I think that's where some of that, gap can be bridged.
That was quite a few excellent points in there, Ananya, not just one. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think this consistent theme of, again, getting, like, it takes time. Like, there's no you can't take a shortcut to get this clarity or just rush through it. Many of those answers do come along the journey. Is so important. And as we now organically, I think all of you kind of started talking a little bit about your current situation now when you're more of in a leadership role. I had a quick question. So now that you are in a leadership role, and most of you are either directly involved or influence hiring on your team, uh, how do you perceive candidates that have switched jobs quite often when they are trying to get clarity in their career? Do you judge? Do you not judge? It depends. I think
are they
it
design jobs, or are they just like any job? They're like cook and then like here and then like what's that?
I would say we can go with design jobs, and it depends should not
Okay.
be an option because everyone's gonna go with it depends. So,
Fair.
how do you perceive that? Is there are you like, oh, 2 year switches are okay, 1 year not, or is there, or do you not care? How do you look at those LinkedIn timelines?
Uh, Honestly, I from my side, at least in terms of my experience of hiring, I don't really pay that much attention to like how often people jump. I'm more interested in the work they do, whether they can talk about their work and whether they'll fit with the team. So if you're jumping a lot, maybe I'll be like, oh, I'll kind of peruse through and be like, where are they jumping from? But if anything, I usually just kind of ask them like, why did you leave? And probably for whatever, that's fine. Whatever personal reason you left is your choice. I'm not inclined to really like think about your past. I kind of want to see where you're going to come with like join, how you're going to join us and how you're going to grow with us. So
Yeah.
from my side, I don't really pay that much attention.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think especially if it's a candidate from an underrepresented background who's having this experience, we, for all of, the effort that a lot of companies are putting into diversity and equity, the inclusion piece is often a really big missing piece. So especially, plus one to everything that you just expressed, but I'm also almost more like skeptical in a sense of if somebody's from an upper background, the conversation I also want to have is to just sort of better understand, maybe why didn't some of these places work out, and really be attuned to that and attuned to the need of folks from different backgrounds, because there's that's a big issue, and just something to be really mindful of a hiring manager is also just the background and some of the other challenges that people might be having that you haven't personally experienced in your career.
I think this thing can vary a little bit from one job market to another. For example, I feel like places that have a very strong tech base and have a lot of organizations where it's quite acceptable and okay for people to jump from one role to the other. The perception can be slightly different as opposed to other places. And what I've seen is that sometimes it becomes a red flag more for HR, who is responsible for screening, where they'll just say that this candidate, has a history of, really short stint, so they probably wouldn't be a very safe hire, they're a risky hire, and you want to be really wary of things like, are they putting some sort of a bond in the contract or something like that, where you'll have to pay them back if you leave before like 1 year or something like that. But I personally see that design managers don't really care more about it, because what they care about is that what kind of work can this person do. I have seen that HR can sort of make this a little bit more of an issue, which is also the same thing as, like the number of years of experience requirement for a particular role. It's a very arbitrary concept, but the HR could be very bullish on it, where they could be like, oh, 2 years, 10 months is not good enough, because anything under 3 years is just not okay, right? So sometimes if you are getting blocked by stuff like that, where you're noticing that you're applying for roles and you just can't get through, it makes sense to find those people on LinkedIn and maybe, direct message them yourself, or try and find some sort of a connection that you have, maybe a senior from college, maybe a friend of a friend or whatever. Just like try to get your profile to the right person and just bypass those layers of people that's sort of, going to be blocking you from that situation. Because uh, I mean, there is a lot of places where this doesn't matter, but it can happen with you. You can just find yourself in a situation like that, where, you're constantly getting blocked due to HR screening, or you're just in a job market where it's a little bit of a bigger deal, or, people are just hiring is not that hot at that time. So people are being really picky about what candidates they can get in. So it's not a given that it'll never ever become an issue for you. uh, you just have to be sort of clear about why you did what you did, and be able to explain that really clearly when you're asked about it, because chances are you will get asked about it. Even a design manager would want to know why you have made certain moves in your career. But if you're finding yourself getting blocked due to that, it makes sense to just hustle a little bit and, just sort of try and get your foot in the door directly.
Mhm.
I think in the agency world as well, you could go the kind of freelance route and be somewhere for 1 week, move somewhere else, you're on a pitch, move somewhere else. You could have 6 agencies in 6 weeks if you really tried hard. So it can also just be the way of working in the industry at the time. And you pick up tons from that as well. Being able to quickly context switch. I mean, we do it now from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, but previously, having a week somewhere working on one client, moving somewhere else working on another client can be really helpful skills to pick up as well.
Mm-hmm.
Very true. Very true. I think back when I used to work in a traditional agency, uh, we would almost be skeptical if someone did not move every 3 years. It's like, is this person not good? Like, why? uh,
That's funny.
just
I was
for
thinking the
yeah,
same thing. I was like, usually I worry if they're there for longer
yeah,
than 3 or 4 years. I'm like, did they just not want to leave? Or
yeah,
yeah, same, same.
yeah. Yeah, I was having recently. I was having this discussion with someone at a blockchain company, Web3 space, and we were talking about how so many of these companies, the space itself is redefining how things are done. But when you look at the hiring process, the mentality around hiring, it's still the same, the old archaic. So on the front, you're disrupting the industry, disrupting the space, but the mechanics by which you are building your team are still, I think, to Ananya's point, like some arbitrary, someone once defined, those kind of parameters or numbers. So very true. Um, Now that all of you are in these leadership roles, just for a little bit of context, there were a few questions around, when you are in this kind of a role, do you completely stop designing? I know, Ananya, you shared a little bit that now you are back in a primarily IC role. What about the other folks? Like, do you do any? Is it all purely people management, or do you still get to uh, dive into design?
From my side, I'm still half billable, so I still work projects. And it is, I don't recommend it. I just like you're pretty much distributing yourself across a lot of people and a lot of subjects and a lot of things. But in a way, like I find a lot of, like you said, Molly, energy from new problem spaces. And for myself, it's if I could not problem solve through design, I feel like I would get sad and I would just not be a great person to be around. And as so, I for myself, I do still design things. And one of the things also with being like a product design manager is that you're also jumping into all of your team's projects as well because you're kind of looking at what's going on. You're trying to figure out how to help them. So in a way, I'm just always in everybody's bucket, and I don't know if that's a great thing, but I definitely think it's good to continue to practice work, like even if it's on the side, or even if you're doing something that makes you happy, is to still practice design in a way because you never. I don't ever want to be removed from the it. I love people, but I also don't like people. So in a way, I'm just. I think design is like my fallback of like, if I can't stand people, I'm gonna go and Figma around and just ignore people for a while. That's me.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier I was player coach for a number of years, and so this is pure people management. And so I think a big growth area for me has been how do I take those skills and then sort of apply them one level up and a little bit more broadly at sort of like to a strategic end or like for a vision. And so yes, I'm very involved in the day-to-day work. I don't design UI, but my constant struggle is finding those focus times so I can still get into like, Figma, or now often it's like FigJam, to just kind of like think through things at a high level, think more about like the scaffolding and some of just the strong points of view I need to provide the team so that they can then execute on their work. And to me, that's still design. So I'm still involved in it, not at the level. And sometimes there's problems that come up and I'm like, ooh, I wish I could just like go into the zone and really jam on this. But just really trying to focus on how do I channel, all of that experience and those skills just to a bit of a different end, and still getting a lot of enjoyment out of that too.
I feel like for me in my role, it can kind of change a lot from quarter to quarter, depending on just what's happening across the team. More kind of broadly, maybe my time is spent a third still hands-on, and then a third of my time maybe broader strategy on different projects, and then a third on the people managing side, which I found is quite a nice mix. Same with you, Thary. I think if I didn't get to do any design, I'd go a little crazy and need to then at 6 open up Figma on my own laptop and just do something. That was kind of keep going back to the agency world, but that was always something that I found quite fascinating, that as you become more senior, it's almost like an inverse proportion of the amount of design you do to the number of decks you design. So you're then like live in Keynote, or now you'd live in Google Slides.
Yeah.
But whenever my old creative director got to do like a little design task, if we were doing a pitch or something, and he had to, quickly mock up an ad or something like that, you could immediately see like his eyes just widen. He was super into it for like half an hour in the day, and then it was back to Keynote, and he was like, "Oh, got to do this again." So I think it's important to stay in it and stay close to your passion if you're still loving doing design too.
Right. So the passion for design seems to be the consistent thread. So Ananya, for you, again, you went from being the AVP of product design, so in a very senior leadership role, at Zomato, to now kind of back to more of an IC focus. Was that passion the main driver? I don't know if you can speak to the company part,
Yeah,
like,
I
was the company decision a factor?
I think it was a couple of reasons, and I think the pandemic
Mm,
itself played a very big role in that, right? Don't think, I don't know if I would have made the same decisions had the pandemic never happened, and I don't know if I would have even become the AVP if the pandemic hadn't happened. When it first hit, our business sort of disappeared overnight. We went from a million orders a day to zero orders a day because nobody knew if you could get it from food or how exactly can you get COVID. And I remember that the entire team was just trying to put things out to reassure customers that delivery is safe. We are actually introducing a lot of measures to have things like contactless delivery, have the delivery staff wear masks, have sanitation stations installed at restaurants. And it wasn't just things that you're putting on the app. The operations team is doing all of this remotely, right? And I think that at that time I was already sort of managing the team, but it wasn't, the title wasn't sort of called the AVP of product design. And we put out a lot of things in a very short span of time, right? And I think that personally also the pandemic was like really tough. We've sort of now been working from home for 18 months now. And, on the personal front, I suffered a few losses at home. Almost my entire family had COVID at one point of time or the other. My one of my grandparents passed away during that time, and it sort of made me just take pause and just ask myself, what is it that I'm doing? I thought my career goals are very clear to me. Before that, I knew what I wanted to do, I knew where I wanted to go, and it just changed a lot of things for me. It wasn't so clear anymore that what do I really want to do, and it started to feel like I've been ultra focused on just my career, just school or just work, and I haven't given a lot of time to myself personally. I think a lot of those things came together where these things were in the back of my head. I wasn't actively thinking about moving out into a different role, but when somebody from Microsoft approached me and spoke to me, it just stayed in my head. Like I couldn't really get it out of my head. And funnily enough, I spoke with them. I got an offer. I declined at that time, and then I went back to them after a few months. So I think it was just something that it just became a stronger feeling over time. While I loved my job over there, it is a very demanding job. I'm the only manager, and I have like 15 or 16 reports. I'm also doing hands-on work, also responsible for hiring, and very, very fast-paced organization, right? So I think I got to a point where I started to feel like, I've taken it to a certain place, and I don't know if I want to be doing it at this sort of pace, for the long term, because the organization obviously isn't going to change, right? Because you feel like you can't sort of give it that sort of thing. And I think that factor, that I wanted a little bit space to focus more on my craft, and for a change, have people mentor me, because in that organization, I am the sort of most senior, most designer. I don't necessarily have mentors to turn to. I will have mentors in other roles. There'll be mentors in product or engineering that I can speak to, but there is no design mentor as such. So I started to feel like maybe I'm getting a little bit stagnated in terms of what I can even teach my team, right? Maybe I've given them whatever I knew already. So I think that those sort of things came together for me to help me realize that I'm still like really early in my career. 6 years into your career is probably nothing. And moving into a design leadership position is something that can happen over a period of time. It's not something that has to happen right now. And I'm lucky that I got to have a little bit taste of it, because now I understand how things work on the other side, and I can have so much more empathy for my design leaders, because I understand what they're going through on a given day. But I felt that there was a lot for me to still learn about my individual craft, and Microsoft just felt like a really great environment to be able to do that. There are so many people involved, and I'm really getting to focus on how do you even sort of craft the entire narrative of what you're building. You get to take your time to really sort of build out experiences. So I felt that it was something that was a very good balance of a lot of different things that I was looking for. And I think that ultimately is what helped me decide. It wasn't an easy decision by any means. And, I kind of knew doing that this is something that I will have to explain in all future interviews forever, for the rest of my life. Everybody is going to ask me, why did you decide to sort of make that career move? And there could be a lot of people who would say that, that was such a stupid thing to do. Why would you do that? Why would you leave? And uh, funnily enough, when I was leaving was like right after the IPO of the company had happened, right? So it was like a weird sort of a moment to do that. But I think that ultimately you've got to be true to what you're feeling. You got to be true to yourself, and it's like it's not goodbye forever. There are a lot of people at Zomato who come back after a couple of years. So I don't know what will happen in the future, but I just felt that I just needed more time for myself personally and my family, and felt like a different environment would help me have that.
Wow, thank you. I really, really appreciate you, sharing your experience and all these things so candidly. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Like sometimes we have these, again, societal kind of like labels and understanding of where what things should fit or how someone's career should always go. But yeah, but that's again not how we are as humans, and also like as designers especially, we are always like exploring different things, and not afraid to try out new experiences. And yeah, massive props to you, and also really appreciate you kind of almost like setting a little bit of example around that too. That it's really important to again identify, get inner clarity with where you find your energy, to what Molly said. So on that note, I think it'll be amazing to hear from all of you. Now that you are, again, for folks watching, it's like they look at the fancy companies, we look at the logos, the labels, and if you think about yourself, when you were at the beginning of your career, and if you would look at similar folks who are holding the titles and roles you have now, you would be all starry eyed, like, oh, those folks have everything figured out, and it's amazing. Um, what would you suggest? And I know it's a little bit of a cliched question, but to everyone watching, there's always a lot of kind of gold, because you'll hear the answer now, but when you get to that stage, you're like, now it makes sense why they said this answer. Like, what would be your biggest learning or biggest recommendation or suggestion to folks watching that are also trying to pursue these paths that they see again in our LinkedIn profiles? Like they're trying to reverse engineer your profiles and be like, okay, so maybe I should work for a certain agency, then go work at a startup, then at a company. What would you recommend as our closing remarks?
I can start. This is something that I think I've kind of learned in the past few years myself, is that you're more than your design career. This one thing is like everybody is so enveloped in having this idea of what they expect their design career to be. But I would just pose the question internally to be like, what design is a great thing, but what are you other than that? Like, you are more than design. And that's where I've found a lot of my joy, is because if you focus too much of your identity to the role of your job, you become very one dimensional. And that's not something that, I don't know, will really ever bring you joy, because you're laying all of that in someone else's hands. So when you're thinking about the role that you want to find or you want to go to, I would say, is it a means to an end, or is it the thing that like drives you? Are you finding joy in designing because that's what you love to do, or do you also like to cook and go out and travel and do other things? Like, those are all pieces of your life that will only make your career better and make you better. So wherever direction you try to go, just know that you are more than your job. You are a person. And that's one of the ways that I've been able to continue to be in the design industry, because it's easy to get like pummeled every time you go into a call and you get rejected, or things are like it's easy to kind of get just skeptical about the design space or the design industry. So I think if you remove yourself from that influence, then you're more likely to have a career that is personal to you or with purpose. That's my recommendation.
Really wonderfully said, Terry. Thank you.
That's a pretty tough one to follow.
I'm just gonna mic drop that. I'm just gonna walk away.
My answer maybe doesn't go quite as deep, and I think follows a lot of what we've talked about so far, but really just follow what you enjoy. And you might have this goal 3-4 jobs down the line, but if you ignore what you're doing right now or what you're going to do next, you're probably not going to get there anyway. And by the time it is 3 or 4 jobs later, what you're after is probably completely different to the goal you had 5-10 years ago. So yeah, I'd have a think about what you love to do in design, in the creative industry. Try it out. If you can do it at your day job, great. If you can't, start a side project. You'll learn a bunch of stuff which you can then put into your day job, if hopefully you get to do that in your 9 to 5 as well, and then just see where you get, roll with the punches, and try to have a great time along the way.
So true, Sam. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I would plus 100 to both of those sentiments. I think if I had anything else to add, of course, your career is about an investment in yourself, but I think also just investing in like your community and your network and the folks around you. And, you're going to meet people at this stage in your career, and you're going to see other people's growths, and to really just develop those relationships and lean on each other and look towards folks. This idea of mentorship doesn't have to be super formal. That you're the kind of asking somebody to be your mentor, but you're going to have peers that you can learn from, people that you're working with. Just really like focusing on that part of your journey too, because it's not a singular thing, and you're going to go through this with people alongside of you too, and then to really lean on and develop those relationships.
Yeah, I think all of those are such great points. I don't know what I can add to that, but the only thing that comes to my mind is to remember to be kind and patient with yourself in the beginning. You can be too rough on yourself and think that you're not doing good enough, or things aren't really going anywhere. Things take some time, and it doesn't really matter what organization, what education, boot camp, etc., where you're from. You can't really get complacent because you've come from a certain education, or because you're in a certain company, doesn't automatically guarantee success or progress. You will have to, sort of take charge of situations, push forward for your work. And you should also ask for help. Like, it's totally okay to like raise your hand and ask people for help. Tell them that you don't really know what's going on or you need help with something, it's a lot better to do that instead of just sit silently and suffer and nobody around you even knows that you're suffering. And then, something if something happens, it becomes a surprise. So I think that usually when situations turn miserable, it's because one of those things have happened, that you were having a bad time and you just didn't share it with anybody and they just couldn't find any solutions for you in time. So I think that just to sort of remember, it's a process, it takes time. And sometimes there's a lot of this debt on designers where you're just expected to live, breathe design, where every word that comes out of your mouth should be articulate, every little thing that you put down should be beautiful, and that can create a lot of pressure. I know I certainly feel that way, where it feels like, there's no space for me to be a human being. It's okay to sort of disconnect from work and say that, okay, that's my job and it's a job, and I have to remember that at the end of my day. Like Terry said, you don't let it make become your identity, and have other interests outside of design. So that will actually make you a better designer, because if you're happy as a person, that is how you also produce like good and better work. So I think just like it's all a process, and it's okay. Just like it's okay if you're not doing side projects in the evening. It's okay if you like shut down at 6 p.m. All of that is fine. Just like be a little bit kind to yourself, because it's a very long journey, and you have to have your energy and sort of drive with you through it. So it's sort of decades long, and I think that if you sort of give it all in the beginning, then you don't have a lot left. So I think that's just what I want to end on.
Amazing! Wow, thank you so much, everyone. I think that was a great sum up. That don't forget to enjoy the journey. Like, you're not chasing something at the end. It's You're just gonna hit different milestones with different stickers of labels on them, but do enjoy each and every part. So I know someone in the Kelly in chat was writing like this talk or this session felt more like a life development, a personal development workshop. Because again, I think that's the common theme, right? Like, I think throughout the conference has been like talking just about the human part, and the pandemic definitely, I think, helped us also realize that it's not just shortcuts or tools and processes, but it's understanding your human, the humans around you. So thank you so much, everyone. That was an incredible panel discussion. I know we went 20 minutes over because I could go on and on. I loved talking about these things, but I really appreciate all of you joining us today.
Thank
Yeah,
you
thank you
Yeah,
for
all.
hosting.
Thank you so
such a
much.
great time. Yeah,
Yeah, it was lovely
Absolutely.
talking to
thanks,
everyone.
Preet.
Thank you. And thank you, Ananya. I know it's quite late. Thank you for sticking
No
around. And
worries.
thank you to everyone for joining us across time zones. Hope to see you around. Have a
Yeah.
good
Yeah,
one.
Bye.
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 Bye.